There's nothing that's written, though, to describe exactly what that reasonably related cost might include?
The legislation says that the costs be reasonably related to the establishment of your store in the community and that those fees be made public record. And then the Cannabis Control Commission has come out with quite a bit of additional guidance on what some examples of these fees might be. But what's happening in communities, which has been problematic, is that in the beginning, no one knew what legal cannabis would bring to Massachusetts. So there was an unknown. So the first few shops that opened, the communities said, let's just go for the full 3% just to play it safe without knowing what's going to happen. And what's ultimately happened is that there's been no impacts. It's been a largely positive impact. It's created many, many new jobs. I think more than 17,000 new jobs and 200 million in new state and local tax revenue. And so it didn't have the quote unquote negative impacts that opponents of legalization had vocalized. Therefore, the 3% really isn't legitimate anymore because there are no actual impacts that communities are facing. However, communities are still seeking the full 3%, which is where it becomes a little problematic.
So let me ask you specifically about the route that you took after that. As a bit of a groundbreaking woman, you have now become what will soon be a landmark case in standing for fair business practices in Massachusetts cannabis industry, basically, because you're standing up against this fine, which seems to be, to me, unfair and based on a lot of stigmatized language. The city said back to you that due to STEM being open in the city, there was an increased need for drug and mental health services, specifically in schools, and there had been an increase in domestic issues.
Yeah.
Where do you go from there when you hear a claim like that?
Well, when we were requesting this information, which I am required to request of my community, Haverhill, annually to submit for my license renewal, I am required to request what have the impacts been. We received zero response from the community. We waited. We heard back from the Cannabis Control Commission, the state regulating body, and they said, no, please follow up again within 90 days and submit the documentation from the City of Haverhill. We did so, at which point we received the letter of which you just read a few excerpts of what they were alleging the impact had been. Now, these were just allegations not substantiated by any documentation. And you can imagine receiving a letter like that after doing so much positive work in the community. It's really a punch in the gut. And by paying these fees, would I then be complicit in acknowledging that, oh, yeah, those are our fees? Absolutely not. There has been no evidence of increased crime, increased drug use in schools, increased sales to minors. None of those things have taken place. So it's exactly what you're saying. It's stigmatized language. And really, it's created a pay-to-play market and a money grab by communities to be a tax generator. And let's be clear, this is not a sales tax. This is a mitigation fee that is supposed to be reasonably related to actual costs, not imagined costs. So I don't think it's unreasonable to ask the City of Haverhill to substantiate this information, which is essentially what we did. And when they did not comply, we filed a suit in Salem Superior Court to compel such documentation.
So you have still paid all of the state tax fees. There's nothing else that has been unpaid. There's nothing else that you're, fighting back against. It's literally just the excessive fees that the city is claiming that your business caused them.
That's correct.
But they haven't quite detailed what they say you've caused them, right?
That is correct. The fact is, the city has not provided any evidence of actual costs imposed by STEM or any other cannabis operation. And as I mentioned, there have been no increased city services such as police, fire, ambulance, or public health. The mayor has not asked for any budget increases attributable to legal cannabis operations. None of the departments have submitted budget increases requests due to legal cannabis. And the city never produced a cost report as required by the law until they were forced to because of our lawsuit. So the cost report they ultimately did produce as a result of the lawsuit was immediately criticized by the chairman of the Cannabis Control Commission. And Chairman Steve Hoffman said rightly that Haverhill and other communities have been dealing with cannabis use for decades, and that they were not justified in claiming sudden new costs all of a sudden for something that has been around for a very long time. And the report still listed no actual evidence resulting in an increased cost. All it did was dump existing salaries for police and school personnel on the pile of money being collected by the city for impact fees. In other words, the city used the report and the pre-existing cost to justify the impact fees without demonstrating any actual impacts.
Wow. And there's even statistics from other states that show that the opening of cannabis shops decreases issues like crime, issues like youth getting their hands on alcohol. Usually the money that is brought into towns from cannabis shops, it goes into things like schools and scholarships, roads and police funds. So really cannabis businesses bring a lot to the community. And now they're just kind of asking you for more and more.
Right. And what that does, unfortunately, is that it affects independent operators such as myself and creates a pay-to-play atmosphere so that big cannabis companies and big money companies that have very deep bank accounts can be the only ones afford to play in this space. And other operators behind me that haven't even opened yet have to plan for these fees and might not ever make it to the finish line because of fees like this. And I am very adamant about sticking up for small business, independent operators, social equity, restorative justice through my fight for these fees. After 3 years of legal cannabis sales, we as a society have to look at the facts. There have been no store sales to minors. There have been no increases in crime around cannabis facilities. There has been no decrease in home or business values due to the presence of legal cannabis operations. There have been no reported increases in driving while intoxicated by cannabis. There have been no budget increases for public health or public safety at the state or local level attributed to legal cannabis. And it's time for the legislature to step in and overhaul the cannabis legislation so that we can either have someone enforcing these host community agreements, which give the communities all the power, or simply do away with them altogether.
So there are actually a couple of towns and municipalities in Massachusetts that have done away with it. Northampton in central Mass and Lee out in western Mass. They have decided that the impact fees are kind of unnecessary because there, just like you're saying, there really wasn't that negative impact on the community from that business. There's not like community impact fees from liquor stores. You know, they don't have to pay into a fund for alcohol awareness campaigns in schools. And I think that there are a few towns out there where the policymakers are catching on to the fact that this is really, I think, a stigmatized reason for having a fee on a company.
Absolutely. And again, it's not a tax. These were designed to be mitigation costs, and the mitigation impacts just haven't taken place. So I give a huge shout out to Northampton and Lee for recognizing this, for standing up and offering their leadership on this. I think you'll see more and more communities continue to do this. And I also think it's important to note that many communities are starting to push back on these fees. A cannabis retailer in Gloucester is bringing that city to court because of the impact fees. And I'm very glad to have another retailer joining in this effort. It's time that communities stop treating cannabis businesses differently than other businesses that sell alcohol or tobacco or pharmaceuticals. Each of those types of businesses probably have more community impacts than cannabis operations.
Absolutely, for sure. And you're a trendsetter now. As you said, HVV out on Cape Ann is now suing their host city of Gloucester for similar reasons. Apart from more fairness to the little folk in the growing cannabis industry, what else do you hope to see from this lawsuit?
I hope to hold, in particular my community, a system accountable to this type of behavior. This is a power structure that exists in my community and beyond that needs to be challenged and needs to be held accountable. This way of doing business should not take place in any industry, but particularly in the cannabis industry. And the problem, again, that you have is that there's independent operators, social equity applicants that are so deserving to be in this space. And a large barrier of entry is capital. What if we could circumvent these sham fees into a social equity fund that can help mom and pop operators across the state, people of color that have been wrongly incarcerated by cannabis in the past, help them get their businesses off the ground. So to me, this addresses a system-wide breakdown, and I do believe that the law is on our side and that we will be successful in the end. And I'm happy to take that fight on for my business, for my community, and for the industry as a whole.
I'm really glad to hear that somebody is challenging the system, and best of luck to you in your lawsuit.
Thank you so much, Brit, for having me on, and I'll keep you posted on everything.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on. Thanks so much to today's guest, Caroline Pineau of STEM Adult Use Cannabis Dispensary. You can browse her classic and cool cannabis shop at stemhaverhill.com. Make sure you check out the newest issue of Different Leaf, the magazine, out now at differentleaf.com and at your local Barnes & Noble bookstore. Make sure you're following us on social media at Different Leaf and at different_leaf, and I'm on social media at Brit the British. Thanks to production manager Jennifer Hayes, producer Andrea Maraskin, and thanks to Homebody for the music.